Hi, I'm Dave Clayton and thank you for joining me on one of my two classes on the Photoshop Virtual Summit. This class is all about making a flyer in Photoshop. Now, for those of you that know me, I've actually written a book about InDesign and I do teach InDesign and Photoshop for designers in the Photoshop user magazine for Kelby One. Now, the reason I do this is because I know a lot of people don't have InDesign but do have Photoshop and they want to be able to create assets that they can't necessarily do in InDesign. But Photoshop is a really versatile tool. So when I was explaining this class to a few people, I said really, although the class is called Creating Flyers in Photoshop, it really could just be called How to Make Photoshop Think It's InDesign. Now what we're going to do in this class is I'm going to show you how to make this two-sided flyer. Now it's not going to win awards for design, but really all I want to show you are some simple techniques where you can make Photoshop think it's InDesign and be able to create something like a flyer or something for your business using the tools already in Photoshop. But I'm also going to show you a new feature that's been added. You'll also see that I'm using the Adobe Photoshop pre-release. Now this is because I'm recording this before Adobe Max is launched, and by the time you see this in November, the 2021 version will be out. But the new feature I wanted to show you is in this. I'm going to go through creating a document. We're going to set our document up. We're going to show you this new shape feature that we're going to use in the document. We're going to look at frame options, and we're going to look at layer comps as well. There'll be a few other bits added in, but for now what we're going to do is just build up a recipe of showing you how to use the Photoshop features to create a flyer and to show you how you can work in Photoshop without having to jump into any other apps to create the assets that you need. So without further ado, let's jump in, start the course, and we're going to go ahead and create our document. Okay, for this we're going to come up to Photoshop and we're going to go File, New. And we're going to get our new dialog open here. Now, because I'm based in England, I work in millimeters, it's easier for me to do this. So we're going to go ahead and create a small flyer, which we call A5 size. And that's 148 by 210 millimeters. We're going to click on that as our preset. And you'll see over here, we've got our dimensions. Now I want it to be portrait. We can see the dimensions here. I'm not going to worry too much about RGB color or CMYK color. This is just purely to show you the features that are in Photoshop. If you were printing, I'd recommend you use CMYK. For now, we're going to keep the resolution at 300 dots per inch or 300 dpi because that's the best resolution I find for printing. Before we go ahead and click create, we're going to use another feature in Photoshop that helps us make Photoshop behave a little bit more like InDesign, because in InDesign you have pages. So if you think about laying out an 8-page brochure, in InDesign you would tell it that it's 8 pages and you'd see the 8 pages laid out. Well, in Photoshop we have artboards, so we can kind of cheat it. So what we're going to do is we're going to tick the artboard feature here and we're going to go ahead and click create. So you can see here we've got our document, and you'll see just above the document here it's called Artboard 1. Let's pull our layer panel down here and we can see that we've got our Artboard 1 here. I'm just going to expand this. Now what we want to do is create our front and back. So rather than create this document and create a second document for our rear, we can make both sides of the flyer in the same document. To do this, we're just going to come up to Artboard and we're going to click the plus sign to the right of the artboard. We can actually add it above, below or to the left, but for this we're going to click the one on the right hand side. And what that's going to do is give us two artboards, which is going to be the front and back of our document. Let's just move this over here a little. So the next thing we're going to do is now create some guides, much like we would if we were in InDesign. And this is also really simple. We're just going to click on our Artboard 1 and we're going to come up to View. Now before we go ahead and add our guides, we're just going to check one thing. If you haven't got the ruler open, click Command or Control R and that will turn the ruler on or off. We want this on for now, and if you just right click, you've got a choice of what measurements you want it to be. I'm working in millimeters, so I'm going to keep it ticked at millimeters. This means that any measurements that I look at in panels are going to be in millimeters, which makes it easier to work with. So the next thing we're going to do is come up to View, and we're going to go to New Guide Layout. Now this gives you this dialog window here, and what we can do is actually decide how many columns and rows and the gutter and the margin we want for our document. Now for those of you that do work in print, you'll know that we would normally have bleed and margins and all sorts, but for this in Photoshop we're just really showing you the technique, and then you can go ahead and create additional sized artboards to allow for that bleed. I will show you that briefly, but for now we're just looking at layout and how to add assets to the actual page. So the target for this is the selected artboards. I'm going to change that to all artboards because I want this to apply to both. I also want my document to have 8 columns. This is going to make it easier to lay the artwork out. I'm also going to change my gutter to just 1mm, and I'm going to add a margin, and I'm going to change the margin for the whole document to 1mm, which is the top, the bottom, the left and the right. That's just easier for me to work with. I can ask it to center columns, and what that will do will center the columns in the middle of the document as well. If I wanted to, I could go ahead and add some rows just by ticking here. I'm not going to do that, but if I wanted to say maybe add 4 rows into there, they would be equally spaced, and I can also change the gutter as well to match the, but we're not going to need them for now, so we're just going to untick it. Obviously don't forget to tick the preview so you can see what you're doing. So let's go ahead and click OK. Now because we're only working on Artboard 1, we're only going to see the guides for Artboard 1. If we click on Artboard 2, we'll see the guides for that. But let's just click back on Artboard 1 for the moment. As I showed you in the preview in the beginning, we're going to be using some different assets. So we've got text, we're going to shapes. Just before we move on, I just wanted to show you another quick tip to do with guides, because this is something that a lot of people don't realise is also in Photoshop. So what I've got here is a plain document. I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to select a couple of shapes and drag them out. So I'm going to draw a square there. We'll just give that a fill of orange, and we'll just take that stroke off for a second. I just want some plain colours there. And then what I'm going to do is going to replicate that by holding the Alt Option key down. I'm going to select those two, and I'm going to make another couple of copies there and drag them down. Now say that was something that you wanted for your document and you wanted to create some guides to work around that. Well, there's a little feature in Photoshop under the View menu that a lot of people don't realise is there. So if we just select those 4 shapes and come up to View, if we come down to the bottom, we've got an option here called New Guides from Shape, and what that's going to do is it's going to give you guides in your document based on the shapes you've applied. So if we just click that, what that's done is it's given us some guides based around those shapes on the page. So now if I wanted to go ahead and add some text, I can just use these guides and I can drag a text frame underneath. Let's just change the color of that type so we can see what we're doing. There we go. And it's really handy if you want to start adding other elements to it and you want those guides based on the shapes you've already added to the document. So that's an extra quick tip to do with guides. If you wanted to lay out your shapes first, you can create your guides based on those shapes. Anyway, back into the tutorial. Okay, so the first part of this is, because this design is going to be using some shapes, I'm going to show you this new feature that's been added to Photoshop that I got really excited about. And the reason is because I also work with Illustrator and I also work with InDesign, and both of those programs allow me to create rounded corners on shapes on the fly. So what do I mean by that? Well, in Photoshop, you know that when you create a shape, you can already apply rounded corners to it because that's in the Properties panel. But what we've got added here is not only that feature, but also a new shape, which is the triangle. And yes, I was excited about it. Very sad, I know, but I do love it when things cross over from one application to another. Now you'll see here on the left hand side of my tool panel, I've actually got the shape here. Now this is because I've laid out my toolbar. Now I'm not going to show you how to do that, but if you do want to change your toolbar, just come up to Edit, come down to toolbar, and then what you can do is move around the order of your tools, and also anything that's not in there you can add these extra tools in. So I've laid mine out so that I've actually got all of my tools that I want here, and I've also got the shape tools individually. I can stack them together and then they will appear in a stack, but just for this I wanted you to see all of the shapes in my actual toolbar. So we're just going to head and click that done. So over here I've got the triangle tool, but you can also see the circle and the polygon and the rounded rectangle, which always makes me laugh because I don't know why it's included there, because you can take a regular rectangle and add rounded corners to it anyway, but that's by the by. Let's just click on this triangle tool. Now before I go and draw the triangle, I just want to show you a couple of little settings here that you need to be aware of. If we come up to the top here in the control panel, we've got a little gear icon. If we click on that, we've got some options here. The path options are the color of the path itself. So it's not the stroke color, this is just the path color so you can see what you're drawing. You've got some options here for thickness and also for color. Now maybe if your eyesight's not that good, you might want a thicker path. Also, depending on what the color of your document is or your background, you might have a color that clashes. So you can actually change that path color to something else. I tend to go for magenta because it stands out and I can see what I'm doing, and it's not often that I create things in that particular color. So I'm going to go for magenta. That's going to give me my path color. My options here for the triangle are as follows. I've got an unconstrained triangle, which is pretty much drawing out a triangle without using the shift key. And don't even get me started on whether you've got the shift key activated or not. Muscle memory still makes me click it. I haven't turned it off. But anyway, unconstrained is drawing a triangle out without using the shift key to constrain it. Equilateral gives me an equilateral triangle. Fixed size, that allows me to actually set the width and the height of my triangle. And proportion, that allows me to tell it to be like the width I can say is 3 times what the height's going to be. So I'd put in 3 and 1 or 4 and 2. Whichever I want that proportion to be, I just add it in there. The other thing is I can tell it to draw from center, which I prefer, which is like holding the Alt Option key down. I'm on a Mac. I must admit I don't know the Windows keys very well, but I will try and put them on screen because I'll go and check them afterwards. But yeah, I like drawing from the center, and I'm going to pick an equilateral triangle. Now on this first side of the flyer, we're actually going to be using hexagons, but I just wanted to show you the shape first, just to show you A, the new shape that's there, and B, what the annotation is. So let's come over to our triangle. From the center of the document, I'm going to click and draw out my triangle nice and big. Now you can see in the appearance panel, I've got a fill color of blue. I haven't got a stroke applied, so if I did, it would be 10 point and it would also be this single line. So let's come over and look at our triangle here. What have we got? So we've got an equilateral triangle, but I don't know if you can see it. Obviously the annotation is magenta, what we said. In fact, let's just turn that color down a bit. Let's just change it to a lilac. There we go. So you can see here we've got this small kind of circle at the top of the triangle, and you'll see that the cursor changed to kind of a little rounded curve. This is our on the fly rounded corner annotation. If you've used Illustrator, it will look very, very familiar. It's kind of called dynamic corners. In InDesign, it's slightly different. You can create rounded corners slightly different, but you can do it directly from the shape or from the frame. So here what we're going to do is we're just going to click and we're going to drag, and you'll see that the path has a couple of points, but you can see from the path annotation that we can actually bring that right down until they meet, and it's virtually going to be a circle. But we're just going to pull that back up there, and you'll see also that the annotation in the size is working in millimeters. So let's say I want this to be right, there you go, 12 millimeters round. But if you look over on the properties panel, and I don't know why this happens, I will try and find out and maybe put a note in the notes for this class later on, because as I record this, I'm using the pre-release version, because the Adobe Max event hasn't gone ahead, and therefore I haven't got the live 2021 version. But over in the properties panel, we've also got a choice here where we can actually change this setting either by scrubbing, which you can see live on the document, but you'll also see it's in pixels. So I was dragging it in millimeters, but over here it's in pixels. So really it's down to you what you want. If you've got a particularly mathematical size you need it to be, go ahead and put that in. But for now, I like doing it by eye, just by looking at it, what's sort of appealing to me. So I just like to use the annotation, but I can always finesse it over here. If you're one of those people that likes nice round numbers, then obviously address that here or here. We can also go and give it a stroke, like I said, but we're just going to leave the triangle for the moment. Now, this is the settings for the triangle. On this document, we're going to be using the octagon or polygon tool, and I'm going to create a six-sided shape, and then we're going to make some adjustments to it. So that's just an overview of how we're going to use the shape. And like I said, we're going to go over to the document one. I'm going to remove this triangle and we're going to start laying out some shapes on the first side of our flyer just to get the design going. You may recognize it is quite similar to the advert for this actual event where we've got the speakers' heads in all of the shapes. So that's kind of the theme I've gone for. So let's go ahead and get started on that. Okay, so let's start building our flyer. Now the first thing I'm going to do is name my layers or name my artboard. So just double click and we're going to call that front, and we're going to call artboard 2 rear. And then that way we just know which one we're working on. So let's just pull that over there. So let's come over to our front. Now what we're going to do is start the basis of the design with this kind of octagon shape. So I'm just going to come over here to the tool. And again, we can go up to the bar here. Now, here we've got an extra setting called symmetric, which means we are going to get a symmetric shape, but everything else is still the same. We've also got the star ratio, but I'm not going to be drawing the star. I want to draw from center. And what I'm going to do is just click in the middle here, and I'm just going to draw out a shape. Now, straight away, it's adopted the color from before. I'm going to leave it like that for now, but I will be changing them afterwards. So what we can do here is use the same annotation again, and you can see just by clicking and dragging we can close those radiuses down or open them right up. So let's just go up here to about 4 mil, and again the same thing over here in the properties panel. Let's just pull that out so we can see what we're dealing with. We can also change it in pixels, so I can go ahead and change that to 50 pixels if I want. Now what I also want to do is show you an extra little setting here that we're not going to need, but it's a little addition, and I don't know, I find it quite clunky, but it could be useful. If we change this slider here, in fact let's just make this really big, so let's just drag that out. In fact, let's go ahead and make this really big, so I'm just going to hold the Alt key down. So let's go ahead and make this really big. So I'm just going to hold the Shift and Alt key down just to drag it out proportionally so we can see what we're doing. Now if I come over here to the properties panel, I've got this little slider here, and what I can do is actually change that to 10, 11, and obviously the higher up you go you're going to get a really weird shape, till you go all the way up 100 and you're going to get an ellipse because the way I've reshaped it. But we don't want that many, we just want 6. So we can just hit 6 and enter, and then I can come over to the annotation and then I can make these adjustments. So if I just make that to 8 at the moment, and then when we reduce this back down here, there we go, let's just pop it in between those two guides there. If I come back here, you'll see that we can still go ahead and adjust it. So let's pull that back to 8, but you'll also see the pixel size has changed because of the size of the shape. Now I'm going to spin this round, so I'm just going to hold the Shift key and turn it round 90 degrees so I've got the points at the top and the bottom. If we just zoom in there so we can see what we're doing. What I want to do now is just snap that over to the guide, and I'm just going to click and drag so that the other side also snaps to the guide. Now one of the extra things I wanted to do here was also for the flyer is actually use the Photoshop colors. So what I did was I went and got the Photoshop icon from Google, I pasted it into Photoshop, and what I did was I pulled the colors out so that I can use the dark blue and the light blue in this artwork. If you look down here on the swatches panel, I've actually got the colors here and here, and they're the two that we're going to use. So I'm just going to apply a stroke. Let's just hit enter there because I've been reshaping it. Go for the stroke, and I'm going to go ahead and click my dark blue color, and I'm just going to change my stroke here to a single line, and I'm going to make that about 6 points as well. So I don't want it too thick. And the other thing I want to do is also tell the stroke to be on the inside of the shape, because I want the edges of the shape to be within my guides. Let's just drag that out of the way. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually make duplicates of this shape. So I'm going to pull my first shape down over here, and I'm just going to snap that to the right hand side. And then just holding the Alt Option key down, you'll see that the cursor has an extra little white arrow. That means it's going to duplicate the shape. So all I'm going to do is just pull that across, use the smart guides to snap it to the guides. Don't worry if it's not completely central, because we can use the align function there. So just to check they're all aligned, I'm just going to come up here to the alignment. I'm just going to click this one here, and that's going to put them all on a center align. Then what I can do is just take 3 more of these. So we'll take 1, 2, 3. I'm going to hold the Alt key down again, and this time I'm going to actually bring 3 down and close them up like so, and they'll snap into position. And then what I can do is just grab those 4, hold the Alt key down, bring those down, and line those back up there. There we go. So now I've got like a honeycomb set of shapes made from that original shape. And what we're going to do is we're going to convert those to frames and add images inside them. So now we need to convert these into frames. Now, for those of you that have ever used InDesign before, what happens is a frame holds an image. So it's a bit like clipping an image into a shape, which we could do, but it would mean that we'd have to manually keep changing these. So what we do is we convert the shape to a frame. To do that, we just need to select our first shape. We come over to our layers panel. Now at the moment they're not in order. We will put these in order afterwards, but we're going to rename these as we convert them to a frame. To do that, just right click and go to convert to frame. We're going to name that Polygon 1. And we're going to click OK. So now we've converted our shape into a frame. This means we can now place items inside it. Now what I will do is I'll go ahead and convert all 11 into frames, and then we'll come back and look at the second part of this process, which is layer comps. Okay, now we've converted those to frames. I'm just going to put them in the right order in the layer panel. Just makes things a little bit more tidier. So let's just do that really quickly. Okay, so they're in an order now. We got polygon 1 through to 11. The next step is to add something inside them, and for that we're going to need layer comps. Now I've only got 45 to 50 minutes for this class, so I'm not going to show you exactly how to do layer comps. That's something you can find. I recommend actually looking at Jesus Ramirez, the Photoshop channel, because there are a couple of tutorials on there about layer comps. But I'll just quickly cover one aspect of it, and then you can go off and create your own. So let's go to my document where I'm going to be using my faces that I want to put into these shapes. Now we just move that properties panel over, and you can see here I've got 10 faces that are all in my layer panel. What I'm going to do is add an 11th face. So I'm going to come over to my document. I actually downloaded some faces from Adobe stock, and what I'm going to do is make a selection, press Command C, come back to my comps panel and Command V, and I'm going to add the girl in as my layer 11. I'm just going to put her into the center there, and we'll just leave that as it is for now. So we'll go over to layer comps. We're going to add her in. So we're just going to do add new layer comp. She's going to be face 11. We're going to go for visibility, so that's we can have her turned on, and OK. So now we've got our 11th face. I'm going to go ahead and file, save that, and now we've got our comp file saved. We'll come back to our document now, And what we're going to do is we're now going to use that file to put faces into these shapes. To do that, we come over here to Inset Image, and this is where we're going to tell Photoshop where to get the file from. Now we can go to Adobe Stock and get some files from there, but that's a little bit too clumsy. It'd be better to get your images first. Then we can have Place from Local Disk Embedded or Place from Local Disk Linked. Now we can do either of those. I'm going to go with Embedded because I'm only going to use that file. I'm only going to use those 11 faces. The only reason I'd keep it linked is if I was going to change that original faces comps file and maybe add some more or change them, but for the sake of this tutorial we know what we're going to use. We're going to stick with those. So I'm going to go with Place from Local Disk Embedded. Click on that, and that's going to ask me which file do I want to use. So I've already saved it, so I've got PS Faces Comps, and I'm going to click Place. Now what that's going to do is apply the first face to that polygon. Now we know we just added her. She's face 11. I want to start with face 1. So all I need to do is just click in the drop down box, go to face 1, and that will change it to our first face in the comp file. Then what I can do is go ahead and start adding the others. So I can click on Embedded, and what we're going to do is repeat the process for each of these shapes. Now it might seem quite laborious now, but it will make more sense afterwards, because what we're actually doing is we're applying the comp folder into each shape, and then what it means we can do is we can go in and we can change each one individually. So we can either have 11 of the same person, or an alternate where we could have man, woman and have the same two people, or we can just use a combination of all 11. So I'm going to go through and convert all these shapes so that they've each got the same file in, and then what we'll do is we'll show you how to change each one. Okay, so I've now added all 11 faces to all 11 shapes, and just to give you an example of what I mean is, let's say I want to go into this middle one. I don't want it to be face 6, I want it to be face 11. Then I can come down to the bottom one and I can change that to face 6. And what that means, I can quickly switch around those faces depending on the order that we might want. And it's a really cool way of being able to add images into shapes in your document when you're creating a flyer. Do the work at the beginning, but it just makes life so much easier and quicker afterwards when you start working with the file after you've created it. So it's always all about the preparation. Spend the time on the preparation, and then the work will be much easier later on. So let's go and add some type to our document. We'll come over to the type tool. Now I've got a font chosen here, DDC Hardware, which was made by my good design friend Aaron Draplin. It's a great font. It's a really big, thick industrial font. I'm just going to type in Learn Photoshop, and then we'll just pull that over here. There we go. So the first little tip I'm going to show you is something about adjusting the size of type. Now if we just quickly come over to our character panel, I'm just going to set the lead into auto just so that it's in its natural state. If we come over to the actual type size or the font size, what we can do is click the drop down, and then we can go ahead and we can pick one of the sizes that we want. So if we just highlight the text here, and what we'll do is we know it's 61, let's go and change that to 48. So we can go and change that back to 60. So let's leave it at 60, but let's just say I quickly wanted to adjust that without going through and having to pick a specific size or typing it in. If you hold the cursor over the type icon here, you'll see what my friend Tony Harmer calls stapler accident finger. And that looks like a staple's just gone through the top of the finger. But actually it's a scrubby finger. And what you can do is actually scrub and drag to the left and right on that icon. And what that will do is it will increase and decrease the size of the type. So it's a really handy little tip if you're trying to adjust something very quickly. So if we come over to our leading as well, I can do the same there. I can bring it up, I can lower it down, and just using the same style with a little stapler accident finger or scrubby finger, we can just make some adjustments there. So we'll leave that as it is. And now what we're going to do is we're going to convert this to a frame. Now this is a destructive way of doing it. That's why I'm showing this one first. So we'll come over to our type layer. We're just going to change that to convert to frame. We're going to name it Learn Photoshop, and that's going to give us our frame there. Then what we can do is, like I've got some images here in my library, I can go and select one of these images and I can click and drag it straight onto the frame and it will fill it. So let's go ahead and pick one of these. We'll go for this desktop one here. We're just going to click and we're going to drag and release on top of the frame. Now if we come over to the layers panel, we can see that here, and where we'd normally see a clipped image, which we'll show you next, all we can do here is we can just click on the image, come over to it, and then we can adjust it slightly so that it fills some of the words. It just depends where the detail is in the image. Now the next thing we can do is apply a stroke to the text. So let's pick this Photoshop blue. Now this is one place where the scrubby finger doesn't work. You actually do have a slider. So we're just going to increase the size of that, and we can also change that from center to the outside of the text so we see more of the image. So that's one way of adding an effect to type. In fact, let's just turn these guides off for the moment, and the shortcut for that is Command : and that just turns it off and on. That just hides it, so we can see what we're doing here. So that's one way of adding an image to some text, but obviously destructive because we can't change that word Learn Photoshop. So let's try the second way, which is one you probably know, so we'll do it really quickly. So let's just delete that. We're going to go back to our type tool. We're just going to type in Learn Photo, helps if I can spell, Learn Photoshop. Let's click, let's drag that into there. So we've got that in the panel there, and then what we can do is we can click and drag one of our images into there, knock it on top of that, drag it up over the type where we want it to be, and then just using the Alt key between the two, what that will do is that will clip the image into the type. So we've still got live type here, so we can come over to our type tool and we can still say make that Learn in Photoshop, and the image still stays in the type. So that's the second way of showing how you can add something to your type in a document, and we can still go ahead and add a stroke to it and everything, but that's the second part of showing how to add something to type. The third one is an effect I've used a couple of times. I just used it on the front cover of Glyn Dewis's new book, and that's applying a pattern, but it's a very specific kind of pattern. And I used to actually just screenshot this directly out of Photoshop. But what I like to do sometimes if I'm creating something around the word Photoshop is I like using the transparency grid, which is the grey and white small blocks that you get. And that's really easy to do. We can do one of two things. The long way is, or the kind of I guess the fussy way is to create a document, make a transparent layer, and then do a screen grab of the grid, and then you can place that in as a file, as an image file, clip it to the Word, and then you can just move it around. Another way to do it, I'll just show you quickly, is how to make a pattern, and that's really easy. So let's just come out of this document and create a new one. We're going to make it 40 pixels by 40 pixels and click OK. Let's just zoom in so we can see what we're doing here, and that's just with the Command and the plus key on my keyboard. Next thing I'm going to do is just make sure this is set to pixels and not millimeters, and we know it's 40, so I'm just going to drag out a couple of guides, 1 to 20 which snaps there, and 1 to 20 which snaps there. Then I'm going to come over here, get a shape, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle shape, and let's just adjust that slightly, make it snap to the top of the document. There we go. I'll hold the shift key down as well because I've not turned off my shift key, so muscle memory means I still keep forgetting. So we've got our first block. I'm going to change that to a grey colour. Let's just place that there. We'll change that to a grey colour, and we will just come over to here, and let's just make that around about there. So we'll go for, yeah, that'll do, and we'll click OK. And all we're going to do is just hold the Option key down, the Alt Option key, and we're just going to drag that over into the bottom corner as well. So now we've got that, we can come up to Edit, and we can define as a pattern, and we're going to call that grey grid, and we're going to click OK. So now we can come back to our flyer and we can remove this image. So we'll just hit the trash can there and just get rid of that. So we go back to our text, and then this time we can actually apply a pattern to this. To do that, just double click on the layer, and that will bring up our layer style panel. Then we can come down to pattern overlay, and then if we click into our pattern here, we can see the new pattern we just made. We can click on that, and because it's also scalable, we can actually make some changes to this. So we can make the pattern smaller, we can make those grids smaller, we can actually rotate it as well. We're not going to do that, but this way it gives us that cool kind of transparency effect. We can even reduce the opacity if we want, but we're going to leave it like that because I really like this effect for using something for Photoshop. So we're going to go ahead and click OK. Now, just to make that stand out, I am just going to put a rectangle behind it just to give it a little bit of as what our clients call pop. So all we're going to do here is drag the rectangle underneath the type, and then that looks like it's punching through as a transparency. So that's 3 quick ways how to do some cool stuff with type. Now obviously we can turn our grids or our guides back on using the command colon. So let's click on our document and click on that, and then we can just bring our type into the center there of the document. Let's just undo that and just nudge that back into the center there. So now we've got some type, we've got some shapes with images. On this front, I'm just going to show you one quick thing that is something from my other class, which is called Getting Captured in Photoshop, and it's a cool little thing that you may not know about, and I'm doing a whole class on that. But just to give this front of this flyer a really cool background, what we're going to do is be really cheeky and borrow something that already exists from our good friends at Adobe. So let's go ahead and open up the file for the Photoshop logo. So I'm just going to go ahead and open that Photoshop icon. There we go. And then what I'm going to do next is, this is going to be really quick because I'm going to cover all this in my other class. But we're going to come down to the bottom of the libraries panel, and just at the bottom here we're going to click on that plus, and we're going to go to create from image. We're going to click on that, and that's going to open up a window. And what we can do here is create a pattern from this actual icon. So all we need to do is move this around until we get something that we really like. So I'm just going to pull this. Oh, that's actually quite smart. So let's just leave that there. I'm going to ask it to save it to my CC libraries so that I can use it again. Now we could go for any of the other styles here. We can get rid. In fact, that's actually a much better design, so I think I'm going to go for that one instead. We can actually change it to grayscale, but we want to keep it color. I can also change the scale of it, and I can also change the rotation of it, but we'll just leave it like that for now. So we've created a pattern really quickly from the icon. I'm going to save that to my CC libraries, so we've got that down here. Let's close that, and let's go back to our document. Let's just move these out of the way. And then all I'm going to do in the layers panel is I'm going to come down to the bottom here. I'm going to add a new blank layer. I'm just going to move that shape up there. So we've got it at the very bottom. I'm going to select that. I'm going to come over to the libraries, and I'm just going to click on that pattern. And what that's going to do is fill the back of the document with the pattern. And then what I can also do is rotate it if I want. And I can also scale it as well, but I'm just going to leave that for now. And I'm going to click OK, and then I can just reduce the opacity of it if I want, just to make it just drop out at the back. Or I can also use a blend mode, and I could maybe drop it on top of a color and use a blend mode as well. But for now, I'm just going to leave that as the back of the document. Like I said, we're not going to win awards for design, but what we are showing is how to make some techniques work in Photoshop to create a really cool looking flyer. So let's just quickly move on to the back of the document. I want one more thing to show you that's again using the frame options, and also just a quick tip again on how to use layer comps. Once you put these pieces together, you can actually start learning how to put your flyers together. So let's move over to the back of the document now. Okay, so now we're in the rear of the document. Something I want to show you with text that you might not know as well is the way you apply text to a document, especially in Photoshop, because what most people will do is they'll come over to the type tool. Now what we're going to do is come over to the character because we don't want it to be large. Let's just change this down to about 12. We're also going to change that from DD hardware, and we're going to go to something simple like Myriad Pro. So what we would normally do is click on our document, and like I said before, if you've got some placeholder text, that will kick in, and then we would start typing. So say we just wanted to say learn Photoshop, like so. Then we can move that around wherever we want, or we can hit return and we can keep typing. And quite often what happens is when you're typing text out in a Photoshop document, you kind of keep hitting return. When you get to the end of a line, you kind of hit return again because you're trying to line it all up. Now, something that you've been able to do in Photoshop for quite some time is to actually create a text frame. So how do you do that? Well, let's just get rid of that. Let's come over to our type tool. Now, a good tip here is always to set your type over here first, because when it adds the placeholder text, it's going to add it in as whatever it's set in the character panel. Now, for the back of our document here, I say want some type to be in a column down the right hand side of the flyer. So all I need to do is line up with my guide and click and drag, and you'll see there's like a dotted line there. And I can come down and let's put some text to about there and then release it. And what that's going to do is fill that text box with some type. Now at the moment there's not that much type there. Also it's aligned center, so I'm just going to left align it there. In fact, I can even bring that down to 10 as well. If I want some more type in there, I can go up to type, paste lorem ipsum, and what that will do is that will fill that text box with that type. And that's one really cool way of actually adding text into a document without having to keep hitting that return key all the time and get your text to line up. And once it's in there and selected, we can just select all of the text, and we can still change the justification of it within the paragraph panel here. I quite like this style. I like it to fill it from edge to edge. I know there's some gaps in the words, but it obviously depends on your own style and preference. But I'm just going to leave that there for now, because that's one really quick way of adding text to a document. Now let's say we've done this and then we've decided we don't want it to be this paragraph text like we've got here. Well, we can turn it back to what's called point text, which was that first style where you just click and start typing on the document. To do that, just come over to the layer for the text layer, and we're just going to come down and go to convert to point text. Because the type object is converted, it doesn't fit within the bounds. Some text will be deleted during conversion. Continue, yes. And what that's done now is that's taken it out of the paragraph, and it means that I can actually start just adding what I want in the text, and it won't be constrained to that actual paragraph frame that we applied. So don't worry if you create it in one way and want to convert it to the other, because what we can do is we can just select that, just knock that back there. We can select our text, we can come over here, and we can convert it back to paragraph text. So now we've got paragraph text. You'll see the frame changes to a dotted line, and if we want, we can increase it or decrease it. Obviously bear in mind, if you make it smaller, it's not going to fit all the text that you've got in there. And if you've got some text already set, you can go ahead and paste it in. For now, we'll just leave it as this ipsum lorem, or lorem ipsum. I always get that back to front, lorem ipsum. And we'll move on to the next part of the back of this flyer. Now the last part of the design side of this is I wanted to show you something again around the frames. Now these frames, for me, they're really useful. As I've said before, we can create so many parts of this document and keep it so versatile. But another way of creating frames, we've shown you how to do it with shape, we've shown you how to do it with text. I'm now going to show you how to do it freehand. So if we come over to the toolbar here, what we're going to do is select our pen tool. We're going to come over to our document, and all I'm going to do is draw something really random. So I'm just going to click, drag, and I'm going to make a really funky shape here. Going to come down to the bottom, make this very random, and let's come out the document there and close that off. So now I've got this weird shape at the bottom. All we need to do is, as we've done before, we can come over to our shape. We can right click, we can convert that to a frame, we'll click OK, we can come over to our images and we can say maybe get this desk image here, we just drag it onto the frame and that fills the shape with the image. So easy, it's so useful, but the really cool thing about this is if I don't like that image, I can just click and drag a different one on. So where we used layer comps before, we can use a layer comp again with this, or we can just keep clicking and dragging images from our libraries or from a file into it and just do it manually. And as before, if you want to, we can go and add a nice stroke to this. So we'll just click on that. We'll select a nice stroke color from the properties panel. And then the next thing we can do is just change that stroke slightly. We've got a dotted line. We could have a solid line if we want. We can even have a dashed line. I'm going to go for a dotted, and I'm just going to reduce the size of that so the dots are a little bit smaller, just to give it a nice effect around the edge of the image, just to set it off. So there we go. That's just a few effects and techniques you can apply in Photoshop to try and replicate some of the work that you would normally do in InDesign to create a flyer. Now obviously you can take these techniques and go and try your own things. Remember to try the shape tools, try that pattern technique, and also remember you've got quite a lot of control over the text, especially in the character panel as well. There's a lot more there in the text we could look at. We've got variable type as well, which is quite good to work with. But I hope you've enjoyed this class. If you've got any questions, feel free to contact me. I'm always happy to help, and you can check out my article on Photoshop User Magazine each month with Kelby1, where I actually cover Photoshop for designers. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.